Whether it's a hot time in Florida or a rainy night in Georgia,
looking for trouble?
It's the perfect time for the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast.
Oh, yes, sir. Good to see you. Go for this black fix bring you the hottest thing in the country. Real hot and blue. Coming to WHBQ in Memphis, Tennessee.
With your hosts, Justin Gosman and Gurdip Ladar. The TCBcast is on the air.
Welcome to TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis Presley fan podcast. I'm Justin Gosman.
I'm Gurdip Ladar.
Gurdip, how are you doing this week?
Good, doing well. Looking forward to doing a movie show because I haven't done one of these in a while.
Yeah, I aside from Clambake, I legitimately don't remember the last time you did a regular Elvis movie review with me.
Yeah,
because the last few have been like Olivia and Beck and Ryan and different configurations of the crew. So we're going classic TCBcast movie review.
Let's do it.
But before we do the main topic, we do have a couple bits of listener feedback. First one comes from Gary. Gary writes in to say, "Hi, Justin, Gurdip, and gang. Love the latest pod. Very interesting. Got me thinking it would be very interesting to hear Elvis's singles chart history in other countries." So he's referring to the episode that we did about Elvis's hit songs in the Hot 100 between number 41 and 100 that Olivia and Chris and I did. Gary continues to say, "I was looking at Elvis's chart history in the UK since he passed in 1977, and he had 47 singles in the top 40, including 17 in the top 20, 20 in the top 10, and 5 number ones, a record that any of today's acts would be glad of. But I also noticed in the same time in the U.S., he only had just 4 in the top 40, including 1 in the top 20. Even A Little Less Conversation, which was a worldwide hit, only made number 50 in the States, which begs the question, does America take Elvis for granted?" Gary in England.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what would account for that. Maybe just the fact that he never was in those countries? I don't know.
Fans overseas were used to not, having Elvis tour there. So they showed their support in really the only way they could, unless they traveled to the United States to come see his show,
right,
which was buying his records. But even during his lifetime, I think there's definitely certainly a case to be made that his international fans didn't take Elvis for granted as much. They were so much more used to seeing him from afar that there wasn't, I think, that same level of disappointment, especially in the 60s and so on, when Elvis was just doing the movies. It's like, well, it may be disappointing the quality of the films, but it really isn't any different than he wasn't going to tour here anyway. So
Right. Yeah, it's interesting. Maybe they just were really into Elvis and the whole rock and roll revolution from the 50s.
No, and in terms of, does America take Elvis for granted? Absolutely. Without a question. Now, how that... It's kind of a weird dynamic because, we obviously have him in a ton of, famous, Hall of Fames and awards and certifications and massive hits that we've, given him and things like that. But in hindsight, the aftermath of Elvis's death, the landscape was, I think, totally different than it was overseas. There was definitely a backlash to the overwhelming outpouring of Elvis love kind of following his death. And that backlash sort of led to, I think, a kind of not taking him as seriously in the long term. But even in the short term, even during his lifetime, I think there was definitely people just not taking him seriously as an artist. Whereas I think a lot of international fans have always sort of, they're the ones who've tended to really dig into the artistry of it, to the recording sessions and documenting all of the films and things like that. It's very rarely folks from the United States that are that sort of dedicated to make, to write their own books or compile, things for resources for other fans. I mean, even Ernst Jorgensen. I mean, come on, he's from Denmark.
That's right. That's right.
So,
yeah, he wasn't as much as a character, like something to be mocked.
Exactly. He became sort of a punchline here. So, yeah, for sure. Next email comes from Jeff. Jeff writes in to say, Dear Justin, Gurdip, and Beck, I love reviews of obscure Elvis releases from the 80s. So this is referring to the Valentine Gift for You episode, of which I have owned more than a few. My favorite would be one of my first purchases as an independent fan in the early 80s, Elvis Greatest Hits Volume 1. What a great compilation of late 60s and early 70s live and studio material, including my personal favorite, The Sound of Your Cry. For a fan with limited resources, this was a lot of great music for the money. I guess RCA and the general public did not share my opinion because a Volume 2 was never released. One more thought, considering that Elvis and Boots Randolph collaborated on so many great songs, why is there little, if any, saxophone on later Elvis recordings? Guys, thank you for the great show. It just keeps getting better. Jeff. Well, thank you, Jeff.
Sleep, my love, as I kiss you goodbye. Then I won't hear the sound of your cry.
Yeah, very nice. Yeah, I don't know why there was much sax. Was the sax out by the 70s?
Yeah, it was kind of out.
Yeah, it was
It's out of
passe.
style. Obviously,
They're like, Boots, keep walking.
Depending on the genre too, like soul music and stuff like that, you could still find some saxophone and stuff like that. But part of it too was that Elvis had moved on from the Nashville A-Team, and Boots really ran in those kind of circles a lot more at that time. So obviously, if he's not working with a lot of the same crew and the same band, wouldn't be a reason to bring it in. And also stylistically, Elvis obviously wanted to push his music more into kind of an adult contemporary vein.
Country.
Yeah,
Is there much sax in country songs?
Not really. Occasionally. I mean, obviously, Boots Randolph himself is kind of a country artist in a lot of respects, but yeah. So, I think definitely it's mostly just that he just stopped working with the Nashville A-Team and kind of with that crew of people, and not necessarily anything specifically to Boots himself.
Right. He changed every decade. He seems to have changed who he worked with. Like there could be some hangers on, but
sure,
for the most part, it was different.
Yeah, music changes every 12 months, 6 months.
Got
to change with it. Yeah, exactly. And that's it. Yeah. So without any further ado, we got a movie to discuss this week.
That's right. A movie that I haven't seen in a while. But what is it?
We're talking about Double Trouble.
The astounding success story of this rebel with a voice that rocked the world.
Now he crowns his meteoric rise to fame with a fiery burst of dramatic power. The greatest of all the Elvis Presley musicals with a whole album full of brand new songs.
A different kind of role, a different kind of man.
Elvis is in trouble. Big trouble. Double trouble.
'67, filmed in 1966. Yeah, we've come down pretty hard on Double Trouble in the past, but
we have. I haven't.
Well, I have.
Yeah.
But since you had just recently done Double Trouble title song as Song of the Week, thought that now would be a good as time as any to just dive in and give it a shot. and see. When was the first time that you remember seeing Double Trouble?
Well, the first time I saw anything Double Trouble was probably that good old VHS that had all his trailers in it.
Yeah.
And that's where I saw that. Now, for some reason, and I think a lot of other people are similar, I thought Double Trouble meant there was two Elvises, because I think even in the trailer they show two Elvises.
They sort of imply that. They don't really show it, but they imply that that's going to happen again, like with Kissing Cousins.
Yeah, so I thought it was like that, but then when I eventually saw it, which probably was the late 80s, early 90s, I was like, yeah, this is totally different than what they promised in the trailer. But yeah, it's not a lot of fond remembrances for that film. Like to tell you the truth, I didn't really remember much. Like, I saw clips before of some of the songs that he sang, but the story wise, I really forgot about this. And it was interesting to view it again. So it didn't stand out to me back then. And I was curious to see what you think of it later on as we discuss this.
Yeah, so I only first saw this when I got the film on DVD, when I was kind of collecting all the Elvis movies for the first time, and eventually did pick this one up. In fact, it was in a 4-movie set, I think it was. Can't remember what all the other ones were that were with it, but it was obviously a bunch of the MGM movies, but this one, of the ones I remember that were in that set, this one made the least impact on me. I remembered a few scenes, but I just remember overall just not vibing with the humor or what it thought was humor, and just kind of icked out by the story with the young girl, and just overall, like, the music is fine. As we talked about when you did Double Trouble, the title song, as your song of the week, like, I had been introduced to the Double Trouble soundtrack through Jordan's Elvis World, and that was kind of my first experience with anything Double Trouble, was more through the soundtrack, which I didn't really have as much of a problem with, even in terms of like Old MacDonald, but all the other songs too, like Could I Fall in Love, or There's So Much World to See. Like, I just kind of took that all as just like, well, it's Elvis, so it's fine.
I was surprised how much I thought the soundtrack was pretty good, actually.
Yeah, it's stronger than the film it's from. This is actually one of those soundtracks that I think works better divorced from its film. Like, even Old MacDonald, just take that away from the scene in the film. It's not as ridiculous, because you focus on the lyrics that way when you're not looking at the visual of him and Annette Day on the back of the pickup truck. Mm-hmm. When was the last time that you watched Double Trouble?
Well, I think I only saw it the one time.
Really?
I don't think I watched any.
Wow.
Like, for some reason, this is one of those ones that was in my blind spot. Like, I watched other films like Jailhouse Rock, Girls, 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 but this one, really, no. I could have possibly watched it a second time, but I don't remember it. Like, even watching it now for the show,
yeah,
there's a lot of this I don't remember at all. Like, I remember scenes where he's singing, but I don't remember the intricacies of the plot very much.
Yeah, there was one scene towards the back end of the movie where they're all sitting in the police station. Right. And for some reason, in the back of my mind, I thought that scene was in It Happened at the World's Fair. Like, just something mentally like, my brain had cataloged that as it's in a different movie. And I
look like that, though.
No, it doesn't even remotely look like the same film. But I think what it was that Gary Lockwood's character in that movie has those guys from the trailer park that all come over to gamble. And I think that's where my brain, sort of connected the imagery. But similarly, I've revisited individual song sequences from this before, and I have probably watched the film once between the first time I watched it and this time for the show. And I really did not care for the film. So
same thing. You haven't watched it very much.
No. So it was really interesting to go back to the film and watch it. And my takeaway, kind of off the top, was that it's just a really boring film.
I wouldn't call it boring.
Really?
Like, I kind of enjoyed it. I liked the
Wow.
whole, like, mystery comedy thing. Like, if they had pushed more into the whole, like, Agatha Christie mystery, I think I would have enjoyed it even more. But they kind of
Interesting.
pulled away from it to add some comedy elements, which, you know, some work, some don't. I wish
Right.
they had, I wish they had pushed more into that. But obviously, you know, Elvis's salary probably took a majority of the budget, so you
Vast
can only do
chunk
so
of it.
much. But I enjoyed it more than I thought I would, and I rank it higher than a lot of the other films, like a lot of
Wow.
the
That
Ho-Hum films.
surprises me.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah, so just for a little context of where Elvis is at the time that Double Trouble is made, he had just completed work on the How Great Thou Art album at the end of May 1966, along with a number of secular songs, both at those sessions, and laying his vocal on the instrumentals that had been cut in around that time as well. So I'll Remember You, Indescribably Blue, and If Every Day Was Like Christmas. And then he laid those vocals down in the beginning of June, and then by the end of June, he's back out in California working at MGM on Double Trouble. The recording sessions are June 28th through 30th, 1966, and then filming takes place over the next 8 weeks. Really, the only thing of note that kind of happens amid the production is that Elvis meets Jackie Wilson and James Brown for the first time in person. Like, he had obviously seen Jackie Wilson perform, but he hadn't met Jackie apparently in the 50s out in Vegas. So there actually is a photo that you can see of, or a couple photos of, he invited Jackie out to the set of Double Trouble, and you can see them on the lot. Which is really nice.
Would have been cool if he had him like a cameo in there,
That would have been cool.
like in the background or something.
The whispers get louder, calling out your name. Peaches. The whispers get louder, calling your name. Peaches. Don't you hear it? Peaches. Don't you hear it, little baby? Every time I think about you, I can hear you calling my name.
Production ended after 8 weeks, and then 3 weeks after that, he began working on Easy Come, Easy Go for Paramount. So he rolled from one movie straight into the other one.
He looks similar to in both films.
He does, and he actually does look pretty good. Like, he looks trim. He looks charming. His hair. What do you think of his hair in this film, Gurdip?
Yeah, I don't mind the hair. It looks better than it did in a lot other films like Viva Las Vegas.
Yeah,
it doesn't look like a helmet.
It's a little looser than the typical kind of 60s helmet.
He kind of looks like he would in Speedway.
Yeah,
Has that look.
Yeah, exactly. So he looks, I guess, relaxed in the sense that he doesn't care.
Yeah,
And he knows that, like, he's sleepwalking through this film. So
by this time he knows what the deal is.
he knows what the deal is. And so he's not putting in that much effort, but he's also not, like, miserable. Like, there's some of those, like, mid-60s films around the time of, like, Tickle Me, where you can tell that he's, like, frustrated to be there. And this one, you don't really get that sense. You just sort of get him kind of occasionally. There are glimpses in certain scenes where he seems more engaged, especially the musical sequences, a bit more so. And then on the acting side, he's just turning up, clocking in, and going to work.
Yeah, so in the mid-'60s, he was still under the impression that they were going to try to do something different with his films.
Yeah.
That's why he was pushing back, and that's why he probably looked miserable. Here, he's like, this is it. Like, this is so I might as well have fun. If I'm going to, like, this is my lot in life.
Well, I certainly wouldn't go that far. I don't think he's having that much fun in this production. Clearly, from the reports that we have, he was definitely pretty miserable. But at least he's present, and it's not like, some of the later 60s films, whether that's, Stay Away Joe or Clambake or whatever, where at least he's having fun with his co-stars on those. There's not even that with Double Trouble. The thing that kind of is the most common refrain about Elvis during this time is that he's professional, and that he shows up, he knows his lines, he's patient with everybody, but but that's about it. I don't think he's having much fun.
Elvis is on his way.
I just can't rest till I make a man. I've been from Maine to Tennessee, Mexico, and Waikiki, 'cause everything depends upon.
He's off to mod London and swinging Europe with a wild combination of music and mystery. Jewel thieves and jeweled women.
But you've had so many women in your life.
Must be the maternal instinct
What?
that you bring out in chicks. Little mothers can't see to leave you alone.
What are you complaining about? You're married.
That's what I'm complaining about.
This was the last of 3 films in a contract with MGM that had included Harem, Scarum, and Spin Out, and then he would go on to sign another MGM contract for 4 movies that would go up all the way through The Trouble with Girls. But the producers on this were 2 guys by the names of Irwin Winkler and Judd Bernard, and Irwin Winkler's partner Robert Chartoff was also involved to a degree through their production company Chartoff Winkler. But they basically got brought on to make this film for MGM. I read through Irwin Winkler's memoir, A Life in Movies, and he talks a little bit about Double Trouble in that book. He talks about how a guy from the story department at MGM called them up and offered them the script for Double Trouble, and he read through it and he didn't really think much of it, but he pitched it to a guy by the name of Robert O'Brien. O'Brien at MGM's sort of the one who put forth Elvis's name, sort of knew that there was this contractual obligation that they had to fulfill. And the original talk apparently was that they had thought about starring British actress Julie Christie in the role of Jill, and she would be the primary protagonist of it. And then once Elvis's name kind of got tossed around, that's where they decided to sort of restructure the entire script and turn it into an Elvis Presley movie.
Right, but we should mention Winkler, though. He produced some really good films.
Yeah,
like
later
Rocky,
on. Raging Bull. Yeah.
Goodfellas. Like those are good films.
Yeah, and so this is very early in their career as producers, like their first major feature film.
Right.
And what's kind of interesting is that Irwin Winkler actually talks about how the studio system kind of forced their hands to kind of just follow what MGM and Colonel Parker wanted, more so than really have much of a say. He talks about sitting in on production meetings, but that he got no say in who got to direct the film. And apparently he and Judd Bernard originally wanted a director by the name of Rod Amato, who later directed the Garbage Pail Kids movie.
Oh my God.
So maybe not. Maybe they made the right choice, but because MGM ended up insisting on, well, let's use Norman Taurog, who Elvis is comfortable with, familiar with. He likes him. Elvis, Taurog likes working with Elvis, and so that's who ended up directing this film. And when they met, Winkler and Taurog, he talks about how immediately he noticed that Norman Taurog was going blind and could hardly walk up the stairs to even meet him. And
there we go. They're like, this guy should be directing.
Yeah, so this is coming at a point where they're not throwing too much effort at these Elvis Presley movies, even at MGM, and that thankfully does start to turn in the next year or so when they start making films like Live a Little, Love a Little, and Trouble with Girls. But this is pretty formulaic as far as Elvis movies go. Speaking of the Elvis movie formula, the script is one of the few Elvis movie scripts that was written by a woman. Jo Heims wrote this. She was basically working from a story that is credited in the film to a guy by the name of Marc Brandel. And I thought that name was kind of interesting, and I was looking through some of the archival stuff, because apparently the original title for the script was Somebody's Trying to Kill Me, and then that changed to You're Killing Me.
Either of those would have been better.
Yeah, than Double Trouble, which has nothing to do with the story of the film.
You can't have an Elvis film that has killing as the title.
Well, why not? That would be more interesting.
Yeah, you and me would find that interesting.
Right.
The Colonel wouldn't let that happen. So,
Yeah, it wouldn't appeal to the families. You wouldn't...
no, Elvis fans don't want to know about killing. Killing doesn't happen in Elvis's world.
So that got me intrigued, though, because I read on a few places that it was based on a book by this Marc Brandel. And I was like, I had never heard of a book called You're Killing Me or Somebody's Trying to Kill Me. I was Googling to see if he had ever written a book like that. And as it turns out, he did write a book that this is very loosely based on called The Choice from 1960. And I actually read through The Choice by Marc Brandel to see what similarities or differences there were to Double Trouble. And I gotta say, sadly, they completely changed just about everything except for a few character names. So it's really not worth doing a breakdown of like the plot details, like beat for beat. But just as a quick like synopsis, basically what happens in The Choice is that there's this psychopath named Nathaniel Mason who works as an exterminator and sends out letters threatening to murder a bunch of different people whose homes he's previously worked in order to sort of obfuscate the truth about which one he actually intends on killing. And among those 6 are Jill and Claire. And there's a few other characters. There's Anne, Mike, Albert, Chambron, and Nat, the psychopath, has this habit of using aliases that use his real initials, so NM, and he chooses another name from his list of previous customers, Ned Marlowe, to sign all the letters. Well, as it turns out, the real Ned Marlowe, all these people are from this one little borough of New York, because the whole thing is not set in Belgium, it's not set in the UK, it's all New York City, and because everyone is living in the same neighborhood, a whole bunch of them know each other, and so it becomes this suspense thing about this real guy named Ned Marlowe sort of gets framed for sending these threatening letters, saying that he wants to murder all of these people. As it turns out, the murderer wants to kill Anne because he's like driven to a sort of fit of jealous rage over her, like he's super obsessive and sort of a perv. But by sheer coincidence, some of these people are connected. So, for instance, this Anne that he wants to kill has actually been in a lesbian relationship with Jill, who is bisexual, and also in a relationship with the real Ned Marlowe. So it turns out that there's no smuggling diamonds, there's no rich inheritances, no murderous uncles. It's basically just a bunch of strangers from different backgrounds sort of being brought together and put through this ordeal. And the way the Claire character comes in is that she's not this sort of femme fatale that follows a guy around. She actually is the entertainer. She's a nightclub entertainer, a blues singer, and she's just one of the random names that gets the murder letter. And so she calls up her journalist buddy to help investigate it, and eventually her journalist buddy ends up tracking the guy down, and the guy ends up killing himself. And there's really not, like I said, like clearly there's nothing similar. It's wild that there's a quote unquote story by credit for this guy because they used so little of it, with the exception of a couple names. They must, and it does make me wonder if the very first draft was slightly more like the book, with the fact that it was called Somebody's Trying to Kill Me, but it probably veered pretty far off base pretty quickly as soon as they knew that it was going to be an Elvis Presley picture.
Mexico and Waikiki, rain or shine, sleet or snow, I'm searching high and I'm searching low, 'cause everything depends upon that long-legged girl with the short dress on, long-legged girl with the short dress on.
So you don't recommend anyone really reading it if they want?
You won't get any insights about Double Trouble. It was an interesting read. I don't know that it was like a great book. It was sort of fluff, in terms of thriller mystery novels. And it's not really even a mystery because they tell you, like the opening chapter tells you who the guy is who sends the letters, and you sort of follow him throughout the book too. So it's more just like watching all of this ensemble get pulled around and have different dramatic interactions, because obviously the people who get the threatening letters all sort of start to meet up with each other and, you know, are trying to figure out what's going on. Yeah, it was an interesting read, but nobody else has ever talked about that book before in relation to Double Trouble, so I wanted to do it here on TCBcast as a bit of an exclusive, because it is interesting that credit is in there and it's never been talked about. So going into the film itself, obviously, story's very different.
Yeah.
Gurdip, what is the story of Double Trouble?
I mean, it's a bunch of different things that happen, but the main story is that a young girl is interested in a singer. I guess they've been dating for a while, because they don't even show the first time they meet in the film. But we're just, you know, we're in the middle of their, or I guess a few weeks into their romance, and he's a singer. I guess he's somewhat a famous singer because he actually has records out, but might be just that she's a big fan, because no one really seems to recognize him when he's out and about in the street. So I don't know how famous he is, but the story is that she's interested. He finds out that she's underage, and he wants to cut it off. And at the same time, her uncle, is it uncle, right?
Yeah, her uncle Gerald.
Her uncle is none too pleased about that relationship, but there's something odd about him, so he wants to send her off to a private school. And it happens that Elvis, the Elvis character guy, is also touring in that same general area, so they meet up again. And eventually, you know, there's these twists and turns where someone is trying to kill her, and they don't know why, and then the mystery unfolds at the end. So, as I said, I like aspects of the whole murder mystery of the film, but there's a lot of comedy as well, and I think there's some forced comedy. So that's the general synopsis, unless you think I missed something else.
No, that pretty much is the gist of it. Like, all the setup is pretty much there in the first half of the film, and then it goes like pretty off the rails again in the second half when you start introducing all of the crazier characters.
The ending is really
because
madcap.
you know, as we'll talk about, there are jewel thieves that are smuggling diamonds that end up in Elvis's Guy Lambert's suitcase, and there's an inspector and these three cops who are played by the Wiere brothers, and there's these very slapstick characters. So it gets pretty out there in the back half of the film. Sure. So yeah, let's go ahead and start at the top of the film. It opens in the UK, and Elvis is singing Double Trouble. Obviously, the opening credits are just sort of this, it has stills of famous British landmarks before transitioning into this very heavily stylized... discotheque, but it's got like these stills of people dancing and playing instruments.
Very 60s-ish opening.
Very 60s. Honestly, intro is actually kind of cool. It leads you to believe that this film is going to be a lot cooler than it is.
Yeah, almost like a Beatles-esque.
Kinda, yeah. So. And then as soon as we get to the last kind of part of the opening title song, Elvis jumps in. It cuts into the club, and we see Elvis kind of slide into camera, and we see his band backing him up, and it's the most British-looking band ever, because it's Elvis
type hair.
Yeah, with the mop tops. So it's Guy Lambert, his character, and Georgie and the G-Men. Is played by Monty Landis. Now, not too long after making Double Trouble, Monty would actually appear in several episodes of the Monkees TV show as a bunch of various characters. So a lot of folks that were watching the Monkees show would recognize him from that as well. But unfortunately, I do have to sadly report that Monty only just passed away at the end of last year, December 2024, apparently, according to one of his relatives. So he was with us for quite a while, but yeah, it was. It is nice to see him here in this film. He is a memorable part of this film for sure. He shows up and he does sort of follow Guy around Europe for most of the first half of the film, and you think that he's going to be more of a sidekick than he really turns out to be.
No, he comes in, and then he just drops out of the film.
Yeah, eventually he does.
I don't mind him, though. He has that dry British humor going on.
Yeah, he actually has that sort of wry sensibility, and even, after they finish the song, he's sort of having this conversation with Guy about, himself having settled down with, a woman and having kids and stuff like that. And it is interesting that, like, they're trying to show Elvis as like a very hip, still cool to the kids, and all of his bandmates are clearly like adults with marriages and talking about how settled in they are. Thought that was funny. But one of the other people that we meet here at the beginning as well is Claire.
Who played by Yvonne Romain.
Yvonne Romain, which you would know from a whole bunch of horror films, I'm sure.
Yeah, I remember back in the day when I saw her, I knew right away. I was like, she was in Curse of the Werewolf with Oliver Reed in 1961. I was like, I can't forget that face.
Yeah, and earlier in 1966, she had co-starred with Anne Margaret in George Sidney's The Swinger, and she's got this very exotic sort of look to her, and she pops up periodically throughout the film, which turns out to be a spoiler alert. Like she's the lover of the character we're about to meet, Jill.
Spoiler alert.
Her uncle. So she's actually in with the uncle and has been pilfering money from Jill's inheritance.
Right. Well, he has been to
pay for her stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, because I guess she has expensive tastes.
So she's here at this club and she's flirting with Guy Lambert.
Why is she here?
That's what I was just about to ask you.
Yeah.
Because Jill shows up too, and obviously Guy goes over and says hi to Jill, who's played by Annette Day, who, this is her only movie. She was found by the producer Judd Bernard, cast by him, apparently working in like an antique shop, like her family's antique shop in London, plucked out of nowhere, dropped into an Elvis Presley movie, and then never worked on another film ever again. And she appears here as the female protagonist, Jill.
Right. She's okay, but it's very much like you can tell she's not a professional.
You can tell that she's pretty fresh.
Yeah.
Knowing the spoiler that we do, that Yvonne Romain's character, Claire, is in with her uncle, with Jill's uncle. Why is she here to keep an eye on Jill, or is she here just because she likes Guy? Yeah,
well, watching the film, you would think, because she shows up periodically everywhere they go.
Yeah, and keeps showing up at Guy's concerts.
Yeah, so like
she's a big fan.
Yeah. So at hindsight, you're like, why is she here? But then, as you're watching it, you're like, obviously she must play some kind of bigger role.
Yeah.
And then when the ending comes, you're like, well, why was she there in those?
Yeah, you never. Scenes? No, and also in all of the other concert scenes, it doesn't really make sense for her to be there. And as we go through, we'll talk about because
she's keeping tabs on them.
I thought that, but then it gets more confusing as we go along.
Right. Also, did you notice she's sitting at the table, and he walks by, and she's like, "Do you have a light?" And there's a lighter right on her table, and all he does is pick it up and light her cigarette, and then he puts it back down.
I know.
I was like, well, is she a mental case? Very odd, very strange.
It's very, very strange.
It's like if I were to go to a coffee shop and I'm drinking coffee and there's a straw in front of me and a waitress passes by and I'm like, "Do you have a straw?"
And
he
this
just reaches, picks it up in front of me and gives it to me.
Yeah, not only like gives it to you, but like unwraps it and sticks it in your mouth or something.
Now that would be very weird. My wife probably wouldn't like that.
But yeah, Claire obviously has been paying attention to the fact that he's been hanging around with Jill, because she mentions that like she's been there every night since he's opened, or he, you know, but also that he's got this little girlfriend that's been hanging around. And Georgie calls him over and is, you know, starting to moan and groan about his family life.
Yeah.
And Jill eventually shows up, and Guy gets back up on stage and does "Baby, If You Give Me All Your Love." What do you think of "Baby, If You'll Give Me All Your Love"?
Excellent song. Probably one of the best songs in this film.
I'd agree with that, yeah.
I love this song. I always liked this song when I first heard it. It was in one of the Camdens, I think. I don't know which one. I can't remember right now, but that's where I first heard it, and I was like, this is a great song.
Head on the stand-up bass.
Yeah, that was odd. I was like, well, first off, I was like, what's with his clothes? Some of the outfits that he wears, because what is this the one where he's like wearing a blue vest with a big scoop?
Yeah, it's a blue vest under a white jacket, but on top of a white frilly shirt. And yeah, the costuming in this was done by Don Feld, who had done the costuming for Wild in the Country and Viva Las Vegas, which were both excellently costumed.
Yeah.
I don't know what's going on in this film.
Maybe they thought British people dress like that.
European sensibilities being slightly different, maybe.
I didn't get that mannequin head on the base either. I was like, what is this?
It's wacky and absurd, Gurdip.
Yeah, okay.
One thing that I've seen a lot of people talk about is that and even in the poster of Double Trouble, it talks about the mod scene in Europe, more of a UK thing. And mod, like it's not really the film is kind of loosely borrowing some of the aesthetics of the mod subculture in the UK without really understanding any of it here at the beginning.
No, they see the surface level stuff of it.
Yeah. And so it's obviously like they're just trying to show like Elvis in the nightclubs in Europe and trying to capitalize on that, but it really doesn't reflect that subculture at all whatsoever.
Jill says something odd. She's talks about waiting for that ring on her finger.
Yeah.
And the one in your nose. And I was like, what does that mean?
Oh no, that's what Georgie says.
Oh yeah, Georgie says that.
Yeah, Georgie.
What does that mean?
That basically means that she's going to lead him around by the nose in marriage,
like a bull. Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
That meant I was like, what is that?
Yeah, okay. Yeah. So it's setting up the one conflict, I guess, for Guy is that he has to get over this fear of being tied down. It's very flimsy.
Yeah, he should have performed "I Don't Want to Be Tied."
Right, but his big thing is like, oh, you know, I'm gonna be a single man, you know, no matter what.
Yeah,
but he doesn't have much of a character arc in this film.
No, we get nothing. We get nothing of his background. Like, why does he know how to fight?
No, he's a very thinly drawn. Very thinly drawn character. Guy Lambert, as you said, like, he clearly has a recording career because he has a single. He has people showing up to his shows where, you know, in at least 2 countries in Europe. Right. So he has some degree of popularity, but he also...
and he breaks out in song for no reason in a lot of places.
But he also does know karate, and...
Yeah. He's essentially playing Elvis. Like, if you've seen other Elvis films,
yeah,
he's playing a version of him in the other films.
Except Except Elvis never... he's playing this idea of Elvis Presley that isn't remotely... Like, Elvis never played venues this small, except, like, during the Sun Records days, maybe.
He's playing the Hollywood Elvis.
Yeah, this is almost explicitly what Elvis is referring to when, in that 1972 interview, he talks about how the image of, of Elvis that Hollywood had wasn't right. And this type of film, this and sort of like that Spin Out, Double Trouble, Easy Come, Easy Go, this specific era of about 2 or 3 years is what he's referring to.
In other words, they just used you. They did anything they wanted to do.
It was that type. It was more or less that type of thing. I don't think anybody was consciously trying to harm me. It was just Hollywood's image of me was wrong, and I knew it, and I couldn't say anything about it. I couldn't do anything about it. I'd be right into production. I was doing a lot of pictures close together, and the pictures got very similar. A lot of them got very similar, and they, if something was successful, I'd try to recreate it the next time around. So I'd read the first 4 or 5 pages, and I knew that it was just a different name with 12 new songs, and the songs were mediocre in most cases. You can't get some. So that's what might have made it seem like the indifference, But I was never indifferent. I was so concerned until that's all I talked about. It worried me sick,
Yeah, you can. Guy is essentially the other characters in other Elvis films.
Yeah, that's kind of a good way of putting it. He's a composite of other Elvis characters that were far more interestingly drawn.
Right. And he knows how to fight, obviously, so you're like, okay, he fought in other films, like he fought in Tickle Me, so he knows how to fight.
Yeah.
Or Roustabout, he did karate in that, so maybe it's him.
Exactly. It's exactly that. So after Baby If You Give Me All Your Love, Guy invites Jill back to his apartment, and he makes one half-hearted attempt to send her home just so that she'll insist that she go with him. Then they head back to his apartment. And honestly, like, that just wasn't very funny, this whole introduction. No. Like, the comedy's just not super...
Well, him sitting on tea was kind of funny.
Well, no, that scene we're about to talk about, but this introduction...
the intro? Yeah. I thought you meant the actual when they're in the apartment.
No, these first 10 minutes or so where you're just introduced to these characters is just not very entertaining. But then we then we go to Guy's apartment, or his flat, and there's this nice match cut between the sizzle of the coffee machine in the nightclub to the kettle on the stove in the apartment. And Jill is telling Guy all about her life and that she lives with Uncle Gerald after her parents died, and he just looks so bored and sleepy. And I'm like, Elvis, me too. But he's trying to mack on her, trying to get his arms around her.
He doesn't care about her background. He just wants it.
He wants it, yeah. And she's trying to, like, tidy the house and prep the tea, and yeah.
Why is she avoiding it? Is it because she's underage, even though she's interested in him?
That doesn't quite make sense, because clearly she does want to be romanced by him. Yeah. Because that's, like, the whole point of the film, is that she really wants him to, like, commit to marriage and commit to, like, having a relationship and things like that. But why would she come back to his apartment?
I don't know.
When he's a traveling, wandering singer, and that's the one thing that wandering singers and are known.
And we don't know why she's enamored with him. Like, we didn't get that.
He's Elvis Presley.
That's true, but we didn't get that backstory of when they first met. Like, what about him? He's just a singer, so why does she want to marry him all of a sudden?
Why him and not any other particular singer?
Why not Georgie? Well, Georgie's married.
Why not the Beatles?
Yeah.
And she asks him to put something on the record player. So he puts on his own single on the record player, Could I Fall in Love? Yeah. I did like the little fake record label, the Pika Record Co.
Yeah, that's true.
That was pretty cool. And so the instrumental comes on.
It's a long instrumental.
Very long instrumental opening. I'm like, wow, this is not a particularly commercial record. If this is in fact what is on Guy Lambert's single.
This is a 45 too. How long do they have?
No, seriously, it's like 2 minutes. It's the length of a full song just
So that guy never showed up again.
He never shows up again.
That was just a little bit of comedy that they threw in there.
It's just like, oh, Elvis just gets punched, and then the guy makes a quip. He's just like, oh, he looks like he probably deserved it. Which is true.
True, yeah, it is. That line seemed badly overdubbed, too, that Thug's line.
God, that was clearly not the same guy's voice.
Yeah.
Like, it's so badly overdubbed. So he lands on the floor, like, having crashed into everything. He's passed out all night, wakes up in the morning as the phone's going off, and it's Uncle Gerald, Jill's Uncle Gerald, who invites him to come over to their house, and he goes over and meets with Uncle Gerald. And I did think it was funny that the first thing that we cut to is Guy looking at a painting that they claim is a Constable painting, which is John Constable. It's definitely not a John Constable painting.
Didn't it look like Graceland?
A little bit, yeah. It's got sort of that American South, with the columns and stuff like that. The horses out front.
I wondered if that was intentional.
I don't think it was intentional. I think they just grabbed whatever they could from the local thrift store.
Right.
Because it clearly is not. It's definitely not a John Constable, that's for sure. Right. What do you think of the uncle, played by John Williams? Not to be confused with the composer of the same name.
That would have been awesome. He steps away just to compose something. I thought he was fine. I mean, it's not like he had a lot to do, but again, with that dry humor, mostly toward the end. And I do like some of the lines, like, he kind of implies that Elvis's character isn't doing very well because he's just a singer.
Yeah.
And I like Elvis's retort where you're saying, he's like, I'm not offended, I'm just in a hurry. I don't want to lose my place in the bread line. I was like, that's funny. That's a funny line.
It's the closest he gets to. I quite like the uncle, this John Williams. He's a stage trained actor. He brings, that sort of British stiff upper lip, but also being funny when he needs to. And he's certainly playing the sort of authority figure in this household, and confronts Guy by bringing Jill in unexpectedly. She has no idea that he's going to be there, and as she walks in, she's in her schoolgirl uniform, which obviously then reveals to Guy that she is underage, in fact. So lucked out that he didn't do anything.
4 days underage.
4 days underage. She's 17 going on 18.
Right.
Should we talk about this now, or do you want to talk about this later?
I mean, what else is there to say? They kind of they made it less offensive by saying she's almost 18 just by 4 days, but it's still kind of weird.
Yeah, in order to get anything out of this movie at all, you have to get around that. And it just, not only is it, obviously it doesn't hold up by today's standards.
No, by today's standards, people are like, wait, they're like, this is too close to home, no?
Well, that's true also, but aside from that, like, it's just, even if you put yourself, different time and place, different normalization of things in the 60s, it's just not it's not funny enough.
I'm surprised he didn't have a problem with it, Elvis.
I'm surprised too that he didn't really, but I guess, it's the fact that it's written into the script and they're playing it off for laughs, and he just doesn't care at this point anyway.
The fact that I didn't, at a certain stage, I had no say-so in it. I didn't have final approval of the script, which means that I couldn't say this is not good for me, whatever.
They could have changed everything. They could have said she's 20 going on to 21, and at 21 she would gain the inheritance. A very simple change. It's not like it would affect anything.
Yeah, I've never heard anyone make a good excuse for why it couldn't just be a different age that's slightly older, other than the fact that that Elvis has to wait for the age of consent so he can have sex with her and get married to her. But, like, she could just not want to until she gets married. That's perfectly fine. And what's especially weird about it, too, is now having read the book, The Choice, like, all these characters, the Jill and Claire characters, they're adults in the book. So they went out of their way to put her under the age of consent. So they thought this was uproariously funny. Yeah. Apparently.
So they specifically made her underage.
They specifically wrote her to be like, this conflict is a construction of this film.
Yeah.
Not at all based on the story by Marc Brandel.
Right. Right. Well, they're going to two different towns, you know?
They're going to two different towns, but they're on the same boat. So why does he send his crony to kill her on the boat when he knows that guy is also going to be on the boat? Like, why couldn't he just, like, hold off and not send her on that boat and instead, like, get a different ticket and send her to a different country? Where, he's going to offer anyway. It doesn't matter what country she goes to.
Yeah, but he doesn't know Guy can also fight. He thinks he's just a singer, no?
I guess.
He doesn't know he would protect her.
It's pretty badly plotted.
Yeah.
But she just immediately is just like, oh, it's going to the same place as Guy. Let's go. So we go onto the boat and out in the fog of night, heading across to Belgium. We see Guy loading his luggage. We see a creepy smiling man in a black suit who shows up a few times.
I like that guy.
He's played by Maurice Marsac, and he's credited only as the Frenchman in the credits. Right. And there's never any resolution for this guy. He's just a guy that shows up at a few scenes throughout the film, smiles creepily at them, always wearing the same costume and carrying this cane. And I guess it's maybe a bit of a red herring for, like, is he the one who's trying to kill her?
Yeah. It seems like British humor.
There's never an explanation, because we basically do get explanations for all of the other people that she meets that they encounter, but we never get any resolution for this guy. Like, I guess, the visual itself, like, the guy is pretty good at giving, like, the creepy smile, and it's funny when he shows up. But, like, the fact that he keeps showing up just is it. Like, do it the one time or something.
Yeah.
That's weird. And see, immediately after seeing the creepy guy leans on the rail, and the gate opens, and he slips, and he's hanging out there. And I think you're meant to wonder if the guy with the creepy smile did it, but the way that it's shot, you clearly see the guy in the frame and he doesn't do anything with his hands. Like, he's just watching it happen. So it's just an accident. Guy Lambert where we're introduced to this Grayson, I think is his name. He's credited in the film as Iceman, played by John Alderson. But when you actually watch the film with subtitles, the guy says that his name is Grayson and that he works for Scotland Yard. So, Grayson Iceman, maybe? I don't know.
Maybe because he basically has no expression.
True.
He's cold as ice.
Yeah, he's cold as ice. He always has that, like, dead-eyed stare, yeah. Guy notices him kind of picking up that latch off the ground because there's this hand that comes in, and it's the same assassin who unlatches this trolley full of trunks and bags, which, again, almost crushes Jill. Guy saves her at the last minute, and then Guy looks over and sees the Scotland Yard detective in the trench coat picking up the little latch.
Yeah. Also, I was like, when that cart of suitcases comes rolling toward them, why does she scream? Because it's coming from behind her.
Yeah, so she has no idea.
She wouldn't see anything barreling toward her.
No.
And that was added after, too, that scream.
It's clearly dubbed in, just to make the scene more exciting. And instead of calling that guy out on the spot, because Guy watches him pick up the thing, Guy just goes, time to leave, and just gets a kiss, and then they all head in their own different directions. Like, why? Like, just talk to the guy. He's right there. Just be like, hey, did you do that? Why are you trying to kill her? Like, or was this an accident? Like, just talk to the guy. Well, if you talk to the guy, then obviously you don't have a mystery.
Sure.
Oh, jeez. It's badly written. There is a slight slapstick gag right at the end, because Arthur and Archie come over, and they're carrying their bags, and Arthur drops his heavy bag and then lifts his hand and slaps Archie on the face, and we get an extreme close-up of Archie screaming, which cuts to a trombone in the nightclub as Guy is singing City.
You've been listening to the TCBcast, an unofficial Elvis fan podcast. Justin Gosman and Gurdip Ladar have left the building.
Someone must have stomped on his head with those blue suede shoes.
Thank you and good night.